Hi everybody, it's Jay-Z here from Living Easy, and I'm coming at you with another photo tip tutorial. This time we're going to cover off underwater photo editing with your G7X. We like to shoot with the Canon housing built for the G7X. We don't use any additional filters, and one of the big tips is that I actually avoid the default underwater settings on the G7X because it shoots in auto mode, which limits you to JPEG files. I like to shoot in TV mode, which gives me the ability to set my shutter speed between 2 and 400 depending on the wildlife that might be in the water at the time. And then I get raw images, which gives me a lot more room to work with here once I get the files back to the computer. And as I did on the GoPro underwater video, I'd like to give a shout out to JP Danko over at DIYphotography.net because his underwater tutorial is what inspired these videos. So to get started, I'd like to call out that when you scroll down over here on the right to lens corrections, because the G7X is what we're shooting with, we can see that there's a built-in lens profile applied. So it's embedded in the raw image file that comes into Lightroom, so we don't have to do anything here. Now we'll go ahead and scroll back up to the top, and the next step in the process is to grab the white balance dropper. As you remember from our editing toddler photos post, this is our preferred method for setting the white balance, and we're going to look for a neutral color somewhere in the image. The sand is usually a good place to do that, but you don't want it to be too bright of a spot. And once you find the colors that are pretty good, you can check over in the preview image that's over on the navigation panel. And looking there, I'm happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and lock that in for my dropper. And I might just bring down the temp a little bit to get a little bit more of that blue back. And after I've set the white balance, the next part of the process is going to be the exposure adjustment. And really for this image it looks pretty good, but I'm going to brighten it up just a touch and raise my exposure to 0.2. And after I've done my exposure, I'll move on to the contrast, and I'm going to take this pretty far because I lose a lot of that shooting underwater. And now that I've got my contrast up someplace that I'm happy, I will come down to the black slider. And when I go to adjust the blacks on the underwater photos, I'm going to hold the Option key or the Alt key if you're on a Windows computer, and that will bring up the mask layer so that you can drag, and instead of looking at the image, you start to see the colors pop up here where there's clipping in the blacks. And if you look over at the preview, you can see that those areas are just completely black now. So I'm going to slide back over to the right, and you want to get some of the color where there's clipping to show up, and then slide back down just to the point that the clipping disappears. And then I'll let go of the mouse key, and you can see that the shadow under here is nice and black, but it kind of makes everything just a little bit more crisp. And I'll do the same thing holding the Option key or Alt if you're on a Windows computer to adjust the highlights. And actually there's nothing that's peaking in the highlights here. Normally you bring this up until you find that it's bringing that peaking into play, which is essentially the same as on the blacks. It'll just be the brighter sections of the photo. But you'll notice in the sand that as I drag this to the right, I lose the shadows from the water at the surface. And so I'm actually going to bring this down a little bit because I like that shadow in the sand, although I might crop some of that out in the end. So now that I've adjusted my blacks and my highlights, I can look at some of the whites and again use the mask if I want to maybe bring some of that back up until I find some peaking. And this might be a little too much on the sand, so I'm going to Just eyeball it, drop it down a little bit more, and then I'll adjust the clarity. So shooting through all that water makes the images a little soft, and we want to bring the clarity back up. So I don't want it to look too over processed, but I do want it to punch a little bit, and I think I'm happy with the setting here. And next up is bringing back the color. Remember, when we started with the image, we had this green bluish tint, and this is because as you go deeper underwater, you start to lose colors, and red disappears entirely when you get down to scuba diving depths. So we're going to need to bring those back over here with the vibrance, because we don't just want to have the blues and greens. Let's make it full screen again. And don't be shy. You can see that I actually took the vibrance here all the way up to 48. One thing I am a little bit more reserved with is the saturation, because that, I feel like, quickly makes it look much too over processed. So the only thing left now that I've brought in the color and adjusted my exposure is to bring down the noise. In some of these darker parts, you can see a lot of noise in the image. And so under the detail section, I can start to adjust the luminance slider and the color slider for the noise. Now the luminance, usually the general consensus says you can get up towards 50 before you really start to sacrifice image quality. And this color adjustment is the one that you need to watch for, because it will very quickly distort your image. So bring up some noise reduction, we'll zoom back out, and I think that looks quite a bit better than the original photo. The only thing left that I would like to do is crop out some of this unnecessary negative space on the left side of the frame. So we'll bring up the cropping, and I want to make sure that I keep the shadow under the turtle there, and I like the shadow here on the branch of coral, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have all of that, and then I will accept that crop. Yeah, that looks good. And there you have it, folks. That's a quick editing workflow to really bring out the best in those underwater photos that you're taking with the Canon G7X. Be sure to like the video below, and if you have any questions or additional tips, throw them into the comments. And as always, you can head over to livingez.us if you want to learn more. Thanks.